The NFL Draft is right around the corner. We're going to talk about some of my favorite offensive players. Plus, we're going to hit on a couple of defensive players that could be on the move on the Grey Duck NFL Show. Hello and welcome once again to the Grey Duck NFL Show, where we talk all things professional football. I'm your host, Josh Kolodziejski, and folks, we are back after another long hiatus. Had some other things that I was working on to get this podcast up and ready fully before the draft and before the regular season, but it should be more regular now throughout the next couple of weeks. And what our schedule is going to look like is about 2 times per week. On Tuesdays and Thursdays are when the podcasts will release, and that will lead us all the way up until the regular season. And then I believe it will also be Tuesday recaps, Thursday previews, and then any news that comes our way in the middle will be picked up on Wednesday. Any major breaking news, that is. So that is what our tentative future schedule for this Grey Duck NFL Show looks like. Thanks for sticking along as we work out all of the kinks and the scheduling, and I try to juggle a couple of different shows that I'm trying to get up and running here on the Grey Duck Sports Network. You can follow us on Twitter and on TikTok at Grey Duck Sports. That is Grey, Gray, not Gray, Gray. And there we have constant content as well as the updated videos and podcasts of the Grey Duck NFL Show, the Twinkie Town Tavern, and the Vibe of the Vikings. So that is just some quick, clean housekeeping before we get into the meat and potatoes of today's show. Now, what we're going to do today is I'm going to go over some news over the last week and a half that has happened in the NFL, and that includes 3 different bits of news, that include defensive players and major defensive players across the league, a couple of whom might be on the move. And then after that, we're going to start talking NFL draft, and that's what we're going to do both on Tuesday and then on Thursday. Today, I'm going to speak about some of my favorite prospects at each position along the offense, some sleepers, and some guys that I am not quite so high on. And then on Thursday, we'll do the same thing, except just at each defensive position. I've spent a lot of time looking and watching these guys' tape, thanks to the folks over at Caddy's Cut-Ups, which is on Patreon. If you are interested in finding good college film, they have all of the games at their highest tier available, which is about $24 a month. You can get the all 22 from basically every Power 5 game over the last 5 or so years, and a lot of the group of 5 games and independents as well. So I've spent that's mostly been why the Grey Duck NFL Show has been on a hiatus since day one of free agency. I've been spending a lot of time just watching the film, poring it over, and getting that information for you today. And then along with the Tuesday and Thursday shows, by the way, we will also next week have shows after each round of the draft, and I will let you know who's my favorite picks and what teams I thought made the best or made the most of their 2026 NFL draft in both the first round and then on day 2 and then on day 3 as well. So that'll be a little bit more heavy on the podcast content next weekend. But before we get into all of that, let us begin by talking about a contract extension for a Jacksonville Jaguars defender, and that is Travon Walker. The Jaguars last week signed him to a 4-year extension worth $110 million. That is about $28 million per year, and it will run through the end of the 2029 or 2030 season, I believe, and it gives him a contract that is 9th in total value among all edge rushers and is 12th in average annual value among all edge rushers. Maybe some people think, based on who Travon Walker is as a player, he's not at that elite level of edge rusher just yet, but he is a former number 1 overall pick. So some people might think that it is a bit of an overpay. I would disagree because I think when we're talking about the top edge rushers in the NFL, certainly Travon Walker is not one of them. He's still a very good edge rusher, and I think that's about market value for what a better than average, good to great, but not quite elite edge rusher will get you. And the only reason why it is ninth right now in total value and 12th in average annual value and not lower than that is because we still have some of the best edge rushers like Will Anderson that are not on or not out of their rookie contracts just yet and cannot make that much money until they get extensions. So I think this is a fair asking price for Travon Walker. Again, he was the 2022 first overall pick and very controversially was selected ahead of Aiden Hutchinson. And that was kind of something that turned a lot of heads back on that draft day or leading up to that draft day. I think it became certain that the Jaguars were going to use that first overall pick on Travon Walker instead of Aiden Hutchinson, but still a lot of teams kind of question that, and most of those teams that did question it would have turned out to be right, at least so far. Travon Walker put up the better athletic testing numbers, but Aiden Hutchinson always had the better production at the college level, and that has continued into the NFL. But Travon Walker is still an excellent player. He's been above average to very good at both run defense and pass rushing over the first 4 years of his career. He's not elite at either one of those things, but he brings you a fully formed game, and especially when you can pair him up with an edge rusher as dynamic at getting to the quarterback as Josh Hines Allen, well, then you're going to help yourselves out on that defensive line. That's still a solid 1-2 punch. I don't think you want Travon Walker typically as your number one edge rusher on your team, but you want him across from a dominant pass rushing force, and that is what Josh Hines Allen is. So they're going to keep that pair together, and I think that's good news for Jacksonville Jaguars fans. And you're still also banking on this athletic profile to continue to progress, and it has progressed each and every year for Travon Walker, albeit a little bit probably slower than Jaguars fans and the Jaguars coaching staffs would have liked, but nonetheless, he's still just 25 years old. And to put that into perspective, Akeem Mesidor is going to be 25 when the next season starts, and he is going to be a rookie coming out of Miami, and he's probably going to be a first-round pick. So he is the same age as Akeem Mesidor. He still has refining that he can do. He can still grow into his full athletic profile. And if he does reach that ceiling, then he does make himself a number one edge rusher for any team basically across the NFL. And then the contract that he gets looks like it could be a bargain at 4 years and $110 million. And maybe he starts to renegotiate that, but whatever the case is, you could kind of look like Houston Light on your defensive line with two very good pass rushers. I don't think as good as both Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter are, but with Travon Walker and Josh Hines Allen, if Walker fully forms into what they thought he would be when they drafted him number one overall, then that's probably the second best edge rushing duo in the National Football League after that. So it's good news for the Jaguars, and there's still like room to grow. So if you're a Jaguars fan, I think you're especially happy about that, even though there was not a whole lot of cap space to work with during this offseason, and it prevented the team from being super active in free agency. They at least re-signed cornerback Monteric Brown, and now have locked down their defensive line for the most part. And granted, they don't have any first-round picks this year, but still have a lot to be happy about moving into the future for a team that has not made the postseason in back-to-back seasons since, I think, the David Garrard. I'm not sure if the Jaguars made it in 2006, but it might have been the David Garrard era or even the Mark Brunell era of Jacksonville Jaguars football. Might be the last time that this team has made it to the playoffs in back-to-back seasons. So the Jaguars obviously a winner here, and then the other winners are the players that are coming up on their first non-rookie deals pretty soon here. And obviously, we mentioned him earlier, Will Anderson Jr. would be that guy. Jared Verse would be another one, but he's going to be a couple of years down the road, so he's going to probably get even a higher salary as the market continues to inflate. But for next season, it's going to be Will Anderson's turn to get an extension. And Will Anderson from day one has been a top 5 to top 10 edge rusher in the National Football League. And it's helped that he's had studs like Jonathan Grenard and Danielle Hunter next to him at certain points during his career. But he is able to win his isolation matchups. He's able to even break through against double teams. And he has last year the highest quick pressure rate among all edge rushers throughout most of the NFL season. So not only is he getting to the quarterback and pressuring the quarterback, he is getting to the quarterback in a time that is better than the average on a consistent basis, and he's getting to the quarterback in that time more consistently than anyone else in the NFL, even guys like Myles Garrett and Micah Parsons. So you see that Will Anderson is salivating right now. He's licking his chops knowing he's about to get a deal that probably is going to dwarf even this 4-year, $110 million extension that Travon Walker got. And then some other guys at about the Travon Walker level who might see a bigger pay raise than they were expecting, that kind of fit into the same mold as solid athletes, solid edge rushers that aren't necessarily the number one guys on their team, but can be very good number two guys. I think you would look at Tuli Tuipulotu and his big double-digit sack season. I think you would look at Nolan Smith as a guy a lot like Travon Walker in terms of his athletic skill set. He did not have the draft equity of being the number one pick in his draft class, but still has been a athletic rusher that probably has not fully grown into his athletic profile just yet, and has probably been a little bit underwhelming like Travon Walker had been through his first couple of seasons with the Jaguars. Then Kayvon Thibodeau, also in that same mold. He would not obviously be paid by the Giants, and he probably could be traded this offseason, and maybe even during draft night, but whatever team that he ends up settling with, he could get a nice sizable deal there. And then another one that I think that maybe goes under the radar a little bit more because he's actually the number 3 edge rusher on his team, despite having, I think, the best pass rush win rate among those 3. It is Nick Herbig of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he has been just a dominant force, granted in limited snaps, because he's behind both TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith along that Steelers defensive line. And then you also have Cameron Hayward clogging up the middle, even on some of the NASCAR packages that they run. And also with the rookie that they drafted from Oregon, Derek Harmon, last year coming into his second season. So he's got a defensive line ahead of him where he has to be the 5th man among that rotation, and he still has been an efficient and successful pass rusher and run stopper for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he's coming up on his contract extension. I believe he was a 2023 draft pick, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, just the year after Travon Walker got drafted, he's going to be up for an extension, and a guy that was a middle round, day 2, day 3 draft selection by Pittsburgh is going to, make some money, a lot more, on this next contract. So those are the guys that I think this contract is especially good for. Not only the Jacksonville Jaguars, but Will Anderson, I'm sorry for butchering the name, but Tuli Tuipulotu, Kayvon Thibodeau, Nolan Smith, and Nick Herbig. Now, going on to some other defensive player news, that was a player in Travon Walker who is going to be staying with his team for the long term. These are 2 players that might not be staying with their team for the long term, and the first of those is Dexter Lawrence, the big nose tackle for the New York Giants, who is built his career early on as a run stopper, and over the last few years has also become a lethal force rushing the passer as well, going back to like 2022 at the very least. He was a big reason why that Giants team, along with Brian Daboll and his success that he had early on with Daniel Jones and with Saquon Barkley and all that, Dexter Lawrence was also a key piece of that Giants defense in getting them to the postseason, and probably also helping Daniel Jones get a big payday. Dexter Lawrence is requesting a trade from New York, a lifelong Giant, and that is something that kind of came out of the blue for most of the NFL fanscape like myself. I'm not sure how long it had been in the works with all of like the insiders and all of that, the trade requests and whatever they're getting from the agents and the front office members of the New York Giants. But he's unhappy with the situation. He's unhappy. I think that more often than not, it's about an extension, and he is going to want a lot more money, but the Giants are going to have a lot of players that they're going to need to pay. Brian Burns, you invested a lot into, and he's going to be a player that needs to get a payday soon. Abdul Carter, obviously just in his first year, but if you're giving Dexter Lawrence a long-term contract, that's going to butt into the beginning of the next long-term contract for Abdul Carter if he plays out. They also signed a big deal with Paulson Adebo last year, and there's some limits that they might have in making Dexter Lawrence an extension offer up to his liking, and I think that is why that Lawrence is requesting a trade. I'm not sure if I'm the New York Giants that I'm really listening to that. I don't know if I'm entertaining that, and I probably am going to keep negotiating all the way through training camp to see if we can reach some middle ground as to what Dexter Lawrence can get paid, or maybe we hit Dexter Lawrence's numbers and we spend the next couple of months figuring out just how we should structure that to best save money in the future, and put money away for Abdul Carter and for even like Jackson Dart and Malik Neighbors and all of those guys. You got to keep all of that in mind, and I would be trying to earmark that money and kind of start to create a budget of what that would look like come 2028 and 2029, and maybe that's front-loading the money early on in the Dexter Lawrence contract with a big signing bonus or something like that. But the last thing that I want to do is to trade Dexter Lawrence away. I think last year's defensive line had the chance of being pretty historic, with Kayvon Thibodeau in as your rotationary pass rusher, then Abdul Carter, Brian Burns, and they put Brian Burns and Abdul Carter on the same side of the defensive line a lot of the time, and then just ran a ton of stunts with those two guys, and one of them was always getting free to the quarterback. It just did not live up fully to expectations because of some issues against the run. And Dexter Lawrence also had one of his worst seasons since entering the NFL last year, at least in terms of his overall numbers and his PFF grade. I haven't dived really deep into the Dexter Lawrence film just yet. But nonetheless, if you have a pass rushing guy like that in the interior who just pushes centers back into the lap of the quarterback, and then you have Abdul Carter and Brian Burns coming off of opposite edges or even the same edge, and maybe you add like a Sonny Styles or an Arvil Reese in the upcoming draft, or a Caleb Downs who can be used near the line of scrimmage on blitzes as well. I mean, that is a deadly defensive line that becomes less deadly without that force in the middle that can push the pocket back and really give the quarterback nowhere to step up into when the pressure from the outside is coming. And that's a pivotal part of creating pressures against opposing quarterbacks, especially the pocket passers that don't like to get out and scramble as often. So I am doing my darndest if I'm the New York Giants, and if I am John Harbaugh, to not trade away Dexter Lawrence. And if I am going to trade away Dexter Lawrence, if this is a relationship that now has become too dire to try and fix, then, and I'm kind of have my hand forced, then I'm looking to get a first-round pick at the very least, probably like a first and a fifth for Dexter Lawrence, and maybe they send a fourth back or something like that. Maybe we send a fourth along with Dexter Lawrence for that first and the fifth, because I still believe Dexter Lawrence can be a big playmaker. I think teams around the league believe Dexter Lawrence can be a big playmaker, and even though that contract value you'd think might lower the draft capital that Lawrence could garner in a trade, I don't think that's the case, because I think there are many teams that are would give their left arm to sign Dexter Lawrence to an extension, And it's not like the Jonathan Grenard situation in Minnesota, where a lot of teams right now coming off of the injury are hesitant to sign him to a long-term extension, and that's why the trade offers that Minnesota received for Jonathan Grenard and what Minnesota perceived his value to be, those trade offers did not match that. I think the trade offers in this case would match the value of what the Giants think Dexter Lawrence holds. So let's look at some of the teams that could be interested in Dexter Lawrence and some of the good landing spots and the kind of caveats that I put in place here, because basically all 31 teams would gladly clear space for Dexter Lawrence to be on their team. He's maybe the best defensive tackle in the NFL, and if not, he's certainly a top 3 defensive tackle in the NFL, even with the poor season that he had last year, or poor by his standards, I should say. But you need to have the cap space because he's going to need an extension. You need to have the draft capital because it's probably going to cost you a first-round pick. And you need to have a more desperate need or some sort of relationship with Dexter Lawrence in some way, shape, or form, or a relationship with the New York Giants. And the first team that I thought of was the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, this is a team with the Chargers that when I do mock drafts for practice or for fun, I have them a lot of time, especially if Vega Ioane isn't there, I have them picking a defensive tackle. I have them picking Caden McDonald, who is a good run stuffer, much like Dexter Lawrence was coming out of college, that didn't have the pass rushing stuff, much like Dexter Lawrence didn't have coming out of college, but still has the potential to be a good pass rusher. I think a lot of analysts have written him off as just a run stopper. I see with his leverage and with his strength, the ability to, if not win pass rush rates by just getting by the center and guard, at least pushing the center and guard into the lap of the quarterback and creating pressure in that way, even if he's not getting credited necessarily with an actual pressure. But I still see that as something that could continue to develop for Caden McDonald. But we'll talk about that on Thursday's show a little bit more in depth. If you're the Chargers, you could just go with the sure commodity, the known commodity, and you have a lot of cap space. The Chargers had a lot of cap space heading into this free agency period and did not use a whole lot of it. If you go and get Dexter Lawrence and solve one more piece of the puzzle before the NFL draft, and instead of using your first round pick on Caden McDonald, using it for Dexter Lawrence, or using a second or third or whatever it is that the value is going to be, and then you can just use your draft capital for, obviously building the interior of your offensive line, but also just kind of using it as a luxury, using your draft capital as luxury picks, then I would certainly be interested in that if I'm the Chargers. And obviously there's already a pretty direct line of communication, you'd assume, between those two teams because of who the head coaches of both of those teams are in John Harbaugh with the Giants. And it seems like, for all intents and purposes, John Harbaugh is the main decision maker ahead of Joe Shane. That was kind of the major holdup for why he hadn't signed his contract, though it had been reported for like 2 weeks prior that he was going to be the next head coach of the New York Giants. It kind of got tied up because there was Harbaugh trying to make sure that he would have, if not the full command of player personnel, the biggest say in player personnel, so he can, call up Jim Harbaugh and say, hey, bro, you want Dexter Lawrence, and then you're getting him out of the NFC. You're probably only facing him once every 4 years, maybe once every 2 years, every once in a while with how the schedule works now, but you aren't going to worry about him potentially being seen in your conference every single year, and hopefully the only time you would see him is if you're in a Super Bowl, and have the Harbaugh Part 2. Obviously, that is some lofty thinking for where the Giants are currently at, and that's why you'd want to send him to the AFC, so that it is a very low chance that you go up against Dexter Lawrence in a big spot for the rest of his prime. So the Chargers would be a good option, and I think if you put him next to Teair Tart, who is one of the most underrated defensive tackles in the NFL as a run stuffer, I think that really gives your defensive line a good floor to start with. And with Khalil Mack coming back as just kind of a third down edge rusher still, he still has a lot of juice when it comes to rushing the passer. Then your defense, that was pretty good last year, looks even better in the 2026 season. Another team that I think this is more just in my fantasies, it would be the Tennessee Titans, who still have some cap room left over despite their big splashy spending in free agency. I would love to see a Robert Saleh defense with Jeffrey Simmons, Dexter Lawrence, and John Franklin Myers. And maybe that would just be an embarrassment of riches for the Tennessee Titans. And maybe they're not thinking about that at all. But if I am Robert Saleh, I am going to be begging my general manager. In this case, it probably would not be a first-round pick because I think a top 4 pick would be far too valuable for Dexter Lawrence. I think you'd be looking at a second-round pick, which is pretty close to a late first-round pick, and then maybe a third round or fourth round that's pretty close to, a late second or late third-round pick. And that's how I would break down the draft capital there. And then you still get your number 4 overall pick. And if you still want to refine the defense even more, it looks like David Bailey could be an option if the Jets pass on him and take Arvell Reese instead, although it looks like it's going towards David Bailey right now in the betting lines, and through most of the reports, it looks like Bailey's going to be the second-round pick, but you could get Arvell Reese, you could get Ruben Bain, even though he hasn't really fit the mold of what Robert Saleh likes in his edge rushers. But you can pair all those guys up on one defensive line with Simmons, Lawrence, and John Franklin Myers, and now you have one of the most dominant defenses, I think, in the NFL with all of the things around Simmons that they were able to build through free agency. And with Robert Saleh leading the charge, Robert Saleh, a guy who dealt with so many injuries in the 2025 season, yet still somehow made the most of that San Francisco 49ers defense to stop some of the teams that they were going up against, including really holding down the Seattle Seahawks, at least in the regular season games that they played until the Seahawks finally broke open the dam in the postseason. So if I'm the Tennessee Titans, I am very, very interested in bringing Dexter Lawrence over, especially if I get to hold on to pick number 4. I think they should go out and do that. And I know you're not going to probably have too many packages where Simmons, Lawrence, and Franklin Myers are all on the field at the same time. You're going to have 2 out of 3 of those guys on the field always, and they're going to be just destroying the interior offensive lines, especially of the Houston Texans, who are in their division, but really of any team that they go up against in the National Football League. Another one that I think could be a good fit is the New York Jets. They have 4 picks in the top 44, so they have the draft capital. They can work a number of different ways without giving up any future picks, and you're also dealing with a team that, while also building for the future in 2027, is desperately trying to win now because the head coach, probably if things go awry like they did last year, is going to be fired. So Aaron Glenn has been bringing in whatever veterans to short-term deals he can find onto the New York Jets team, and obviously not a big moving cost. You might not even have to move your locker. I'm not sure if I doubt the Jets and Giants share the same locker room within that stadium, but you might just have to go across the hallway or something. Very low moving costs and a short walk from where you are currently at. And Aaron Glenn is in desperate need of just anything that can make his defense look competent so that he can show the Jets brass, the Jets ownership group, and their front office that he is worth keeping around for the next iteration of this team when they draft their quarterback next season. And if the Jets are able to get Dexter Lawrence, that certainly will help Aaron Glenn's case. I'm not sure if it would be enough to keep him for the 2027 season, just based on how bad last year was, with the team getting 0 interceptions throughout the entire season, intercepting 0 passes, just an unheard of stat. So I don't know if really anything could save Aaron Glenn's job, but he's going to be desperate for anything that could help him save his job. He's already brought in, like I said, like Demario Davis. He's brought in just a ton of veterans. They're going to bring in an edge rusher, whether it be the linebacker Arvell Reese, who a lot of people have moving to edge, or the pure edge rusher and David Bailey. It looks like it's going to be one of those guys with, again, like I said, the consensus leaning towards Bailey. And you can put Dexter Lawrence on that line with, guess what, another former Tennessee Titans player that takes up a lot of mass in the center of the defense with Jeffrey Simmons, or not Jeffrey Simmons, T'Vondre Sweat. And it's a good 1-2 punch in the middle of your defensive line there. Another area could be the Pittsburgh Steelers. The familiarity with Patrick Graham as a defensive coordinator way back when. That is kind of how I connect those two teams. I know that we already have talked about the Pittsburgh Steelers having too many defensive linemen to put on the field at the same time, with T.J. Watt, Alex Highsmith, Derek Harmon, and Nick Herbig, and Cameron Hayward. Those are the 5 guys that you're rotating into 4 spots throughout most of the game. Now you could add Dexter Lawrence, but I still think the Patrick Graham connection could maybe convince the Steelers to try and go grab Dexter Lawrence, even though it might not be the most logical landing spot. I also have the San Francisco 49ers and the Los Angeles Rams. Despite both of those teams, well, the Rams especially being loaded on the defensive line, it's still a team that has a history of making these sorts of big swings and bringing in players and trading first-round picks like they're nothing, with the F them picks mentality. They did it with Marcus Peters. They did it, obviously, to get Trent McDuffie this year. They did it to get Jalen Ramsey, so on, so forth. And the 49ers making big splashes by getting guys like Christian McCaffrey. So these are teams that have brought in big swings. The 49ers probably have more of a need on the defensive line than the Rams do. But if the Rams are in as true of a win-now mode that you can get, I think you don't care that you're adding another defensive stud to a defensive line that is loaded with defensive studs already, with 6 guys that potentially could start on all the other teams. We thought the Titans would have an embarrassment of riches. We thought the Steelers would have an embarrassment of riches. But if the Rams got him, that would be even more of an embarrassment of riches. But it would give you virtually injury-proof your defensive line unless things went really, really awry. Because, if 3 of those guys go down, you still have 3 superstars there that can make plays all day. So you could injury-proof that, also keep guys' legs fresh by using a lot of rotations. I know it doesn't make sense from a personnel standpoint necessarily, but it just makes sense for the ways that the Rams have operated over the last 10 years or so since Sean McVay took over. So I would not be surprised if it was the Los Angeles Rams that we hear making a push for Dexter Lawrence. I think the 49ers would fit more into the category of both having the big swings and the need along the defensive line. But again, if I'm the New York Giants, do I, even if I'm not trading within the division, obviously, do I want to trade within the same conference? And then the last team would be the Detroit Lions. I think they would be interested with a middle of the first round draft pick. They could be interested in drafting Dexter Lawrence, or not drafting Dexter Lawrence, but trading for Dexter Lawrence. And they've kind of been looking at needing an edge rusher to pair up with Aiden Hutchinson for the last, ever since Aiden Hutchinson has entered the NFL, trying with like Marcus Davenport and not finding a ton of success there, or Al-Quadin Muhammad as well. So maybe the answer is not looking for an edge rusher as the other pass rusher, but looking for a defensive line interior rusher as your other rusher to really take these other teams down in Dexter Lawrence. They have that with Levi Urizarike coming back, but he's not Dexter Lawrence. He's able to penetrate gaps and split gaps, but he's not Dexter Lawrence. He's not going to hold down the fort against the run and also just completely move and displace centers and guards along the interior. So if you're the Detroit Lions, I think taking a look and seeing how reasonable it would be to bring in Dexter Lawrence next to Aiden Hutchinson. And then if you still want the opposite edge rusher to pair with Aiden Hutchinson, well, you can get a plethora of edge rushers in day 2 of this draft, because I think it's a fairly deep edge rushing class for 2026. So those are the 7 teams that, if I am the New York Giants, I think would be most interested and I could get the most value from for a trade for Dexter Lawrence. Again, this would be assuming there is no repairing the relationship with Dexter Lawrence. There's nothing we could do to convince him to stay. And his agent is saying, well, if you don't trade him, then I'm never going to have another one of my clients, come to yours. You're never going to have a priority among my clients in free agency or with draft picks and trades and all of that. So if that sort of leverage is pulled on the New York Giants and it forces their hand, those are the 7 teams: the Chargers, Titans, Jets, Steelers, 49ers, Rams, and Lions that I think should be the most interested in going for Dexter Lawrence. One other defensive player is on the trade block, and this is in the case of the Giants, it is not a mutually agreed upon thing where the Giants are allowing Dexter Lawrence to seek a trade. It is just coming from one side where Dexter Lawrence is trying to seek a trade. In this next case, it is Kenny Moore II, the outstanding nickel cornerback for the Indianapolis Colts, and the Colts themselves and Moore have now mutually agreed to seek a trade. That news coming last Friday. And looking at some of the strengths of Kenny Moore, is obviously his ability to play as a slot defender, and he's also going to be needing a contract. If I'm the Colts, again, I'm not particularly fond of trading away Kenny Moore, especially when Lou Anarumo's defense kind of has all the gravity go around that overhang apex defensive back. That's how Mike Hilton became so popular in Cincinnati, because he was the center of Lou Anarumo's defense week in, week out, and you'd think Kenny Moore would kind of play that similar style with Lou Anarumo. But for whatever reason, they are going to be shopping Kenny Moore, and maybe Lou Anarumo has something else up his sleeve in terms of a nickel or a slot defender that he wants to bring in, and so be it. I'll trust Lou Anarumo to make that decision. But if there is no backup plan in place, and it is maybe like just the aged body of Mike Hilton or something like that, like they did at the end of last season, then I'd be a little bit more skeptical. Or if it just has to do with the finances of it all. But I think you get a lot from Kenny Moore against the pass and against the run. And I also have a couple of teams that could be interested in Kenny Moore. Obviously, his extension that he would sign would not be as hefty of a price probably as Dexter Lawrence. He also is not going to cost a day 1 pick, certainly. Probably not even a day 2 pick, but maybe a couple of day 3 picks along with a day 3 pick swap in there somewhere. Just based on what the going rate typically is for a nickel cornerback. So there are a lot more teams both with the draft space the draft capital and the cap space to go and try and coax Kenny Moore away from the Indianapolis Colts. And the fact that they're both looking for a trade, I would assume, means that Kenny Moore will have a significant hand in where he is going to go, and probably has a list of teams that he just does not want to go to. Obviously, that is not public knowledge, though. So here are the teams that I think could make a big splash and be a good fit for Kenny Moore. And the first one, and the best one, I think, would be the Carolina Panthers, because for the Carolina Panthers, they run a too-high shell basically all the time. But a lot of the time, they're just rotating into cover 3. And they like to rotate into cover 3 using a bunch of different defensive backs. Sometimes it is the nickel. In a traditional cover 3, the guys that are going to cover the deep thirds of the field are your outside corner on one side, your one of your safeties, typically your free safety up the middle, and then another one of your outside corners on the opposite side, on the opposite sideline. So that is your traditional cover 3, but Carolina likes to mix up their cover 3 looks, and sometimes they invert it, which is where the cornerbacks are now, playing down in the zones, and you're bringing the safety and a nickel defender back and moving the second safety over to one of the sides. So maybe your nickel takes 1/3 of the deep field, your deep safety, your free safety still takes the middle or moves over to the other side, and then the second safety, your strong safety, your box safety, goes to the other deep third of the field, and your cornerbacks kind of stay lower, and then it still looks like cover two, because that's where the outside cornerbacks play in cover two, is they jam at the line of scrimmage and they stay in the flats about 10 yards away from the line of scrimmage. But if you can trick quarterbacks into thinking cover 3 is actually cover 2, then you're tricking them into throwing places that are strengths of cover 3 and the weaknesses of cover 2, and forcing them to make a lot more mistakes. That's what the Carolina Panthers want to do with their defense. And you have J.C. Horn and Mike Jackson, who have been phenomenal playing those positions as zone coverage corners. And you could have a very good nickel corner. Travon Walker has played a lot of the safety position, but he has had to at times be the slot defender when Chow Smith-Wade has not worked out. And I'm not a huge Chow Smith-Wade fan. Their 5th round pick from the 2024 draft. And I thought, especially in the playoff game, Travon Walker was a little bit exploited against the Rams whenever he was matched up against someone like Puka Nacua. I'm not going to say Kenny Moore is going to win every single rep that he has against Puka Nacua, but I think I would give him a better chance one-on-one in a match coverage sort of look against Puka Nacua than I would Travon Walker. So I think if you bring Kenny Moore into that, and he can kind of be that rotational piece that has the speed and the wherewithal to get to his correct zone, even if he is not in the alignment that he would be used to play in that zone starting out at the snap. I think he has the athletic ability to get to those points and to the football IQ to read the routes of the receivers and force opposing quarterbacks, also reading the eyes of the quarterbacks, forcing them to make mistakes. And I think he's a versatile piece that would be helpful for this Carolina Panthers defense, which has slowly made improvements over the last couple of seasons and has already made a couple of big splashes in free agency this year with Devin Lloyd and Jalen Phillips. Another team that I think, so the Panthers would be the team I would be most interested in going after Kenny Moore, because I think that would really help out the Ejiro Evero defense. I think another team could be their division rivals, the Saints. I'm not completely sold on Quincy Riley. It seems like they really like Quincy Riley, but I would prefer Kenny Moore the second as the slot defender there. Although they do have a number of defensive backs that have a lot of experience with Jonas Sanker, Justin Reed, Julian Blackman. Obviously now Kool-Aid McKinstry is going to be one of your outside guys. Do you trust Isaac Yiadom to be your other outside guy, or are you in the draft, trying to draft Mansour Delane, or are you going to maybe even trade down and draft a nickel corner so that you don't have to worry about trading for a guy like Kenny Moore? I don't know what the plan there is with Mickey Loomis, but one of those plans could be bringing in Kenny Moore. Another team I think could be a good fit would be the Green Bay Packers. They are in need of basically any cornerback. Their nickelback for the last couple of years, their slot defender has been Javon Bullard, who is traditionally a safety, and he was my favorite safety from that draft, even though he looks like he's been pretty much outplayed by Evan Williams from that same draft class. But they want to get all three of those guys on the field, and I understand that, but I think it is a little bit of a weakness having Javon Bullard out there too much, and I think Kenny Moore would, again, be the better option, much like I think he would be the better option over Quincy Riley in New Orleans. And again, the Packers are far from being set at the cornerback position. If it started today, if the season started today, it would be Keshawn Nixon and Carrington Valentine, who have had sparks, have looked good at times, but like Keshawn Nixon, the game that the Packers beat the Bears in, he makes up for a big mistake by Evan Williams on the last defensive play for what ended up being the last defensive play for the Packers of that game. Evan Williams loses his guy as he bites on the play action. Keshawn Nixon saw that and saw that guy get open, so he abandoned his guy and floated back to make an interception. So you have those kind of splashy moments with these cornerbacks, but I don't know if they have the consistency that you want to see on a down-to-down basis, so much so that for the playoffs, the Packers obviously didn't believe this because they brought in Trayvon Diggs to kind of shore up that secondary. So bringing in Kenny Moore just gives you more of a floor to work with among that cornerback and defensive back group And then the Minnesota Vikings would also be another team. That's my squad, as you can tell. Byron Murphy has been at his best on the outside, even though with Arizona and early on in his career, he was more of a nickel guy, and he's currently listed as their nickel corner, with Isaiah Rodgers and James Pierre being the outside guys. I think Isaiah Rodgers and James Pierre are good outside guys, and traditionally, or the Brian Flores defense over the last 2 years or 3 years has used nickel with 3 safeties more so than not, so they've gone big nickel. I don't know if that is out of necessity or if that is out of preference for Brian Flores, but I would think it's more so out of necessity, because they just not have had a fluid hip movement slot defender. So they have used the safeties more to have kind of the size advantage with Josh Metellus kind of rotating around, but now they're running low on safety, so they're going to need more cornerbacks because Harrison Smith, we're not sure if he's retiring or not. Theo Jackson and Jay Ward didn't get the job done. Cam Bynum obviously went to the Indianapolis Colts last season. So, we're not completely, sold on our safeties, and so we might be shifting more towards a typical nickel cornerback situation where it's not a safety playing that nickel. And Kenny Moore could be that guy and allow Byron Murphy to go back to the outside. And then you have Isaiah Rodgers and James Pierre in kind of a platoon at the other outside cornerback spot, because those guys are really close to being the same player. They combined remind me of what Avion Terrell would project to be in my mind in the NFL, where you have the clicking clothes and technical skills of James Pierre, but without the athleticism for Pierre. You have the athletic ability for Isaiah Rodgers and still some good technical skills, but not as technically sound as James Pierre. I think Avion Terrell has a mix of both, but I think if you're not going to draft a guy like Avion Terrell, who could play in the nickel, I think Kenny Moore could be an option. And there was a piece on The Athletic today where the Vikings beat writer Alec Lewis does not see the Vikings drafting a cornerback in the first 2 days of the draft. So that's certainly eyebrow raising. Maybe Kenny Moore is a guy that they consider. And then maybe they, don't even have to go safety with Dylan Thieneman or Emmanuel McNeil-Warren in the 18th pick, and maybe they can get a guy like Jordan Tyson or trade up for Jeremiah Love if that becomes an option. And those are all pipe dreams by me. But that, if I was the Minnesota Vikings, I would be very, very interested in pulling something like that. The Buffalo Bills, they lose Teron Johnson. He goes to the Raiders, and he had been their nickel for a while. D. Alford, I don't love. So I would try to get Kenny Moore over there. I would also be interested, again, if there's a defensive player up for grabs, the New York Jets are probably going to be interested because of the desperation I think that Aaron Glenn has this season to make sure his defense looks a lot more competent than it did last year. And right now it's Jarvis Brownlee, who's fine, but he's not Kenny Moore in the slot there. And then to round out the list here, I also have the Cincinnati Bengals. Would Lou Anarumo want to trade it back to the team that basically scapegoated him, or would he kind of put up a fuss? Right now it's Jalen Davis or maybe Jasir Taylor as their nickel cornerback there. DJ Turner had a pretty good season last year as an outside corner, but they still have a lot of holes all over that defense, and that's the secondary is no exception to that outside of the DJ Turner spot and maybe the free safety spot with Brian Cook, who's coming off of his best season as a Kansas City Chief. But you could bring in Kenny Moore to replace Jalen Davis if, Lou Anarumo doesn't throw a stink about it, and then Cincinnati is in a better spot on their defense, which has been absolutely terrible the last couple of seasons. And the other team I think could be the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have Jamal Dean and Joey Porter Jr. as their outside corners. They could bring in Kenny Moore to go along and replace Brandon Eccles, and then you have a secondary and a defensive line that are all top tier. And if Patrick Queen ever figures it back out and starts to look like he did when he was paired with Roquan Smith in Baltimore, then that defense looks like it could be elite once again, albeit very, very old and potentially decrepit. So those are the teams that I like to trade for both Kenny Moore and obviously for Dexter Lawrence. As I mentioned before, we've gone heavy on the defense in the first part of this show. So as we hit the last part, we are going to stay on the opposite side of the football over on the offense. And we're also going to get a little bit younger and start looking ahead at next week's NFL draft. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through the different positions in the NFL, in the offense of an NFL: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, offensive tackle, offensive guard, and center. And for each of those positions, I'm going to give you the player who I have highest ranked among all these guys, and sometimes it matches with consensus and sometimes it does not. The player that I think is going to be a day 2 darling, or maybe even a day 3 darling, a player that I think is going to have a really good career and is going to be a steal for whatever team takes him in day 2 or day 3 of the draft and is not traditionally being mocked in the first round. And then I will also do one that I am lower on consensus and that I just do not understand why the consensus is the way that it is on that quarterback. Or sorry, not quarterback, but offensive player. We're going to start with the quarterback. So it's going to be, once again, my top player at the position, my draft day darling, or my day 2 darling at the position, and then my lowest or lower than consensus player at each position. We'll start with the quarterback, and to no surprise here, Fernando Mendoza is my top quarterback. Just the way that he is able to get the ball to all areas of the field, outside of the hashes, between the hashes, on the sideline. If he needs a perfect back shoulder fade, he can hit it, and he had Elijah Surratt helping him out with that a lot. That was a move that Aaron Rodgers, even as his skill decreased, or his athletic ability decreased later in his career, he could still always make, and to this day can still always make that back shoulder throw and be deadly with it. So that's what Fernando Mendoza can do. It did come from an offense that has a lot easier reads, but he still went through his reads and process well. He might need some time to acclimate to the NFL speed, and he did get flustered a little bit with interior pressure. A guy that I compare him to is the guy that might be his backup quarterback in Kirk Cousins. Not only do they look the same, but they kind of play the same. And then Sam Bradford, because I think Sam Bradford had a little bit more mobility coming out of Oklahoma back in the day, and Kirk Cousins obviously has no mobility whatsoever. Fernando Mendoza has the athletic ability not to be a mobile quarterback. He's still going to be a pocket passer, but he is going to be able to escape at times, and obviously that was seen in the national championship game where he does his best John Elway impression going in for the touchdown that essentially put the game away on a rush. So I think Sam Bradford is a good comp. I know the Athletic Football Show, one of their contributors gave one that I thought was probably the best out of all the comps that I've seen, and that's Carson Palmer, who a guy with, a good arm, good accuracy, not necessarily elite with either of those traits, but is going to be a good quarterback, a top 12 to 15 quarterback in the NFL at his floor, and then could raise into the top 5, top 6 during his best seasons, and being one of those guys that could be an MVP candidate later into his career. Certainly a guy that teams have won the Super Bowl with at their quarterback position. So he can get you a Super Bowl. I think he's not going to take you there by himself, but I think he is a guy that will help the offense more than he hurts the offense, and will have a very good career as a quarterback in the NFL, and a long career at that. And I think he's better than Derek Carr, for instance. So I think he would provide even the Raiders with a better quarterback than they've had. And we remember a guy that the Raiders had way back then. Some of us older gentlemen and ladies, we might remember a quarterback that kind of fell into that same bucket as Fernando Mendoza, as not necessarily the most toolsy quarterback, but still a very good top of the league quarterback, top half of the league quarterback, with Rich Gannon. And Rich Gannon won an MVP despite not being the flashiest, and that's what I think Fernando Mendoza could be. I think he could be that sort of late stage Rich Gannon type of player, except I think he can be that throughout a much longer portion of his career. Now, a quarterback that I think a team could find on day 2 or day 3, and I have a couple of guys that I really like, and one of them is Joe Fagnano from UConn. I thought he has a lot of the good technical ability, a lot of the good mechanics. I think Carson Beck has a lot of the good mechanics. I think those guys might struggle a little bit when things get out of structure, or the defense gives them different looks or rotates into different looks, which you're getting a lot now at the NFL level. So I still have those guys with backup grades. I think I'm higher than Ty Simpson. I don't know where I'm at with Ty Simpson among consensus, because I think he should be drafted in the first round, but I don't think that he is a first round guy. I have him as a day 2 guy. I have him as a guy that should be a starting quarterback in the NFL, but not a top tier starting quarterback in the NFL. To me, he is, if he hits his ceiling, he is Brock Purdy with a bit more life on the football. So I like Ty Simpson, but for me, I think the one that I like, and even though he is rising up draft boards, a little bit more than even the consensus would be Cole Payton. And for me, Cole Payton is right on the cusp of being as a guy that could be a replacement level starter or like a solid starter in the NFL. I don't have him ranked higher than Ty Simpson, and he's my quarterback 3 though among this draft class. I really like the North Dakota State lefty, who has a pretty good arm, who has really good accuracy. It helped that he was throwing to Bryce Lance, who, spoiler alert, I also like a lot. But he also has the athletic makeup, the ability to run, and not just as a fast, elusive sort of runner, but also as just a powerful runner. He was a fullback through his first few years in a ground and pound North Dakota State offense that kind of went away from the passing attack as its main source of offense and went with a ground and pound game with a bunch of different running backs in a bunch of different running formations, almost turning the football clock back to the 1940s or 1950s. And he was the main feature of that as a runner. And then they knew that he could play quarterback, so they bring him up. He plays quarterback, and he looks really good this season. And the delivery is funky. It doesn't look pretty necessarily, but the ball goes to the right spot. The ball gets there on time. He is another guy that has, I think, above average arm talent, not elite tier, zip the ball right through you arm talent, but kind of that tier 3, tier 4 sort of arm talent. And with you mix that with the athletic ability and with a guy that had some good processing power at North Dakota State, granted against some lower level competition at the FCS, I think you have yourselves a pretty good quarterback prospect that could start at the end of this season, or could start early on next year for you. Not necessarily be like going to win you a ton of games, but could be a steal for where he is drafted, for whatever team he is drafted by. And at the very least, I think he makes a very good backup quarterback in the NFL. I think the one point that stuck out that gave me a little bit of pause and kind of stopped me from putting him up even higher would be at times when he processes the defense and when he reads the field, he just gets like completely trigger shy. He looks like a deer in the headlights for a split second and just refuses to pull the trigger when the read is there. Perhaps because he was expecting something else. Now he's not going to make a ton of mistakes, but he's now missing out on some bigger chunk plays and now has to go off of that. And by that time, all the other routes have developed and you're kind of going into playmaker mode, which despite his athletic ability, I'm not sure that he is a great off-platform thrower on a down-in, down-out basis. So the NFL obviously is going to be faster. And if that, processing hiccup can't be rolled out of him, then he's going to just be a backup quarterback for his entire career, especially if it gets worse going up against some higher speed athletes at the professional level. And now we'll do a guy that I am not quite as high on. Another guy that I could like being high, and I know this is not a take that is too stranded from consensus, because I still have this player kind of a wide range of outcomes. More likely than not the lower half of the range of outcomes. But that is Drew Aller, who, if he were to put it all together and maybe he gets to the right system and finds the right quarterback coach that irons out all of the mechanical issues and helps him to learn how to actually read a defense and how to process each route tree and route concepts that an offense has, and how to go from read 1 to read 2 to read 3 and do the progressive possessions and all of that. If he gets that, and that's a big if, and even if he does get that, there's no guarantee that he does fix himself. Then you've got a top-tier quarterback with Drew Aller. I think more often than not, though, you are getting a guy that is going to be like Zach Mettenberger, who also had that same sort of promise, but also had those same issues that Drew Aller had. And I think more often than not, those guys are not able to work out of that mental space because it's just been so ingrained in their mind how to read a defense a certain way, or they just have never learned how to do it properly. And whatever process they have that is flawed, that they've had throughout college, that has gotten them to being a lower ranked prospect than their arm talent would say they should be, that wrong process is already ingrained in their memory, and it's hard to break out of that. So I think more often than not, Drew Aller is going to be a project quarterback and probably will be a third string guy on most teams. I have him in my backup tier of quarterbacks because I think the range of outcomes goes all the way up to the pinnacle, which is a very, very slim possibility, I should say, and that is as a Justin Herbert sort of quarterback, where he can just throw the ball basically wherever he wants on the field. I don't know. That is me having significant doubts that he is able to do that, but there is a world where Drew Aller becomes the best quarterback in this 2026 draft class, but it might be a world that is so much of an outlier that you could go millions of timelines over and still not find it. And the guy that I don't like as much as the rest of this class, and this is a hard one because I feel like most of the consensus here has it similar, where the only two real starting quarterbacks are Fernando Mendoza and Ty Simpson, and then for me, maybe Cole Payton and maybe even Carson Beck, but not as an high tier sort of quarterback, and definitely in the lower third of the NFL for Carson Beck's case. But Garrett Nussmeier is a guy that I see getting a whole lot of. This guy could be, the surprising starting quarterback, and I just do not see it with Garrett Nussmeier. Now, he is a player that throws with anticipation, so that's always going to give you a solid baseline to start at for the NFL, but that anticipation is against college defenses, and his arm strength is not elite. His accuracy is not great. There is no other tool there that kind of combines with that elite processing to make him a viable starting quarterback in the NFL, even if he does go, say, to the Los Angeles Rams and becomes like the next 2 or 3 years he spends under the tutelage of Sean McVay and Matthew Stafford, and by the time Matthew Stafford decides to retire, then they hope that Garrett Nussmeier is there, and I don't think even then he becomes that starting quarterback, because I just don't think he has the arm talent to do it. I think you need both that processing ability, and I don't think Garrett Nussmeier's processing is perfect. I don't think he reads the field perfectly. I think he does a pretty good job at it. But he is not athletic. He is smaller and not athletic. He cannot get out of the pocket. He panics out of the pocket a lot as well. So even if the read is there, because he can't throw out off platform super well, there were some plays that he made that were off platform. I should say that, but he's not the best at it. And I just don't see Garrett Nussmeier being a starting quarterback or being a capable starting quarterback at any point during his NFL career, which kind of diverts from some of the consensus who say that, well, if there's any of these day 2, day 3 guys that can be a starting quarterback, it would probably be, Garrett Nussmeier is typically the answer there, and I just disagree with that analysis altogether. All right, onto running backs, and again, not straying from consensus with my top guy, it's Jeremiah Love, no question, might be the top player of this draft. Certainly, I think the best offensive player in this draft. I have him as a top 3, top 4 running back in the league once he hits his peak. And I just love everything about his game. I think he is the most creative runner in the class, and I think he also has incredible vision. He knows how to get to the second level in not just try to straight line speed it from the second level on. He's going to continue to do things to try and make guys miss at the second level. His jump cuts, I have not seen jump cuts like that, I think, since like Adrian Peterson's jump cuts. That's one of the things he was most known for. And when you pair that up with a good spin move, and obviously, I'm going to say it again, Jeremiah Love does not have the same running power as Adrian Peterson. Adrian Peterson was this amalgamation of all of the best traits from running backs outside of pass protection and pass catching. But from a pure runner standpoint, Adrian Peterson could just do just about anything. If you needed elusivity, he'd give you elusivity. If you needed power, he'd give you power. If you needed just straight one-cut speed, he would give you that as well. I think Jeremiah Love lacks that sort of power, but he still has a good contact balance and has a lot more creativity with the spin moves and with the jump cuts that he's able to use to get through even some of the smallest holes. And I think when you pair all of that together, it is the top running back prospect in this class. And a guy that I think is going to be a Pro Bowler, whatever that term means now, what we would think of as a Pro Bowler back in the early 2000s and whatnot. He would be that sort of Pro Bowler for 5+ years in the NFL, no matter really where he goes. And that's why I think some teams are as early in on him as the Tennessee Titans, reportedly at number 4. So Jeremiah Love, the top guy. Then my day 2, day 3 darling is going to be Kentucky running back Seth McGowan. I also like Jay Knott, even though he didn't get a whole lot of run with Oklahoma. I still like him a lot. I think he is Seth McGowan light. But for me, Seth McGowan is I like him better than Jadarian Price. And he has very fluid feet. He has a lot of explosiveness in terms of, both his like broad jump and his like shuttle speeds were all at I don't think he was at the combine, but he was at the Senior Bowl, and he put up some good numbers there. And it also shows up on film. That's where a lot of his running success comes from, is the cutbacks against an outside zone, going against the grain, and being able to move horizontally without losing any ground vertically while still gaining ground going north and south. He does that a lot. He's not like an elusive runner, but he can make quick cuts, and his vision helps him find where to go more often than not. He has, just like Jeremiah Love, really good vision. And I think that is perhaps, there are so many things that a good running back needs, but that is one of the more important things that a running back needs in order to have success. So I have Seth McGowan as my running back 2. There are the legal concerns. He had been to prison. He is obviously a little bit older as well, so you're not going to get him for as long, and I think that's why his value might be a little bit lower than some of these other guys in most of the consensus mock boards and top 250 or whatever. But for me, Seth McGowan is the number 2 with Jadarian Price, a pretty close number 3. And from there, it just kind of drops off a cliff for me in terms of starting running backs in the league. I think there are 2 ones that would be on the borderline starting tier, and then the rest would be backups or third string or gadget guys. And I should say, for running backs, I have only watched 12 of them so far. So the top 12 on the PFSN consensus board are the ones that I have watched. So Jamari Taylor, like from Virginia, I have not seen him yet. I guess I can. Jonah Coleman, Jaden Knott, Emmett Johnson, Katron Allen, Kalen Black, Damon Claiborne, Nicholas Singleton, Mike Washington, and Le'Veon Moss are all guys that I have also seen. And I'm certainly not as high on Mike Washington as the consensus. And I think he has the speed. I don't think he has much else. I think he can be a backup in this league. I don't think he can be much else than that. Emmett Johnson, also not as high on as other running backs in this current draft. He has a lot of good elusivity, but I think what prevents him from being a starting caliber running back in the NFL, which I think some of these draft analysts look at when they see that potential. They see that from Emmett Johnson. What I think prevents him from being that is just some really poor vision and ability to find the right hold to hit. I think he relies a little bit too much on bouncing it to the outside, and a lot of times does not take the cutback lane when it gets there. I'm really big on the running back vision, and I don't see it as well with Emmett Johnson as I do with my top 3 guys in Jeremiah Love, Seth McGowan, and Jadarian Price. And then 4 and 5, the guys that are borderline starters, but are going to be or solid, really good number 2 guys would be Jonah Coleman and from Washington and Jaden Ott. But I do not really agree with the consensus on Emmett Johnson or Mike Washington. On to wide receiver. And wide receiver 1 for me is going to be the guy that probably is the most polarizing wide receiver prospect in this draft, but I think he is a blue chip prospect. For me, he is a blue chip prospect, and that is Jordan Tyson. Jordan Tyson from Arizona State has the injury concerns, and especially with those injury concerns being hamstring and soft tissue, not just like the knee injuries that could potentially be degenerative. Those are big ifs. But I'm not really taking that into great consideration when I look at who the wide receiver 1 is talent-wise. I think it's Jordan Tyson. I think he sets up his routes well. He kind of almost tells a story throughout the game with his routes. And what I mean by that is he will set them up against the cornerback. Even when the team is running the ball, he will show stem to the outside, then break to the outside early on in the game, but then he'll mix it up later in the game. So it is this like, when you have a musical and then you have this, first song in the musical, this opening song that has strong thematic elements that are going to be important throughout the rest of the musical or the movie. Those are called reprisals. And those reprisals, if there are any, I might not be completely correct on what a reprisal is, but that's what I have always thought a reprisal is. So if there are any musical buffs that say that I'm calling those completely wrong, just let me know and I will gladly concede the point. But from what I understand, the reprisals are when that song comes back, similarly, it doesn't come back with like the singing, but it comes back with its notes, and it is used to kind of characterize the same theme that the previous song showed, but also an evolution of that theme. And like for Frozen 2, which my kids are watching seemingly nonstop. In Frozen 2, you have the Into the Unknown song, and the melody of that is used in parts of the final Elsa song, where she has kind of completed her character arc for the most part, and she is in Atahalan, and she sings the Show Yourself song. There are bits and pieces from earlier on in the movie, from earlier on in that first Into the Unknown song, that are now being used in this in the finale song, at least for Elsa, because I think Anna still has a song. So not to get too off track here, when we talk about that, that's how I envision Jordan Tyson's routes throughout the course of a game. And he runs them so technically sound, and he moves just differently than everyone else on the field. And when you can combine that with that sort of storytelling, that sort of narrative throughout the course of the game, so that you are setting up the cornerbacks for one thing early on in the game and then showing them something else later with the same look, I just really like that from Jordan Tyson. And I think that he, if healthy, major if, he is going to be the best wide receiver from this class. A close second, I think, is a guy that I am certainly higher on than anyone else, but let's just go through some of my honorable mentions of guys that I have a little bit higher than consensus, and I think Bryce Lance would be one, CJ Daniels, Ted Hurst would be one. I really like CJ Daniels as a high floor sort of player. I don't think he is going to be much better than he currently is, but what he currently is valuable as a wide receiver 2, a lower end wide receiver 2, or a top end wide receiver 3 in the NFL, with some good route running, not great tools, but I consistently see him down in the 200s overall in a lot of these draft boards, or even the 300s in some, and I just don't agree with that. I think he is one of the top 10 wide receivers in this class. Some other guys that I think I'm a little bit higher on, like I said, Bryce Lance, and then Brennan Thompson. I like his speed. I don't know if he brings much else besides that. But the number one guy that I am higher on, more so than anyone, I think, is Chris Brazzell II from Tennessee. And I still, I have not been one to necessarily get fooled by the Tennessee wide receivers. I did like Deontay Thornton last year, but I also had kind of tempered expectations for him. I knew we had not seen a full ability to run routes, but it's like you like the idea of what he could do if he could run those routes. Maybe they just weren't, letting him run more than post, fly, drag, curl. Maybe like his route tree is more advanced if we refine it, and then he becomes a better wide receiver with his speed and size. With Deontay Thornton, that obviously had not panned out yet, and I was not going to bank on that panning out, so I still had him as a wide receiver 4 in most offense sort of grade, a guy that could eventually maybe become a higher level wide receiver in the NFL, but he would need to show and prove that he can run a full set of routes in order for me to believe that. For Chris Brazzell, I think a lot of people are saying, okay, well, that's the same with Chris Brazzell. You're just getting another Jalen Hyatt. You're just getting another Deontay Thornton. And I disagree there because, yes, he's running a lot of the same routes as those guys did at Tennessee. His route tree was a little bit more expansive at Tennessee, even though he was only lining up at one side of the field. But you go back to the Tulane tape, and he is even more varied, not only in his route tree, but also in the places where he lines up. There were times he would line up in the slot. He would line up on different sides of the field. He would do a lot of motion. He wouldn't just be far to the outside in the funky sort of Tennessee offense that Josh Heupel runs over there. That kind of has gotten a black mark by the NFL for not running a real offense and not allowing wide receivers to actually develop into pros at the next level, which obviously is not the job of Josh Heupel. That his job is to win football games, but nonetheless, he's not doing right by his wide receivers and getting them prepared for the next portion of their career if they're as talented and physically gifted as Chris Brazzell is. So I like that Chris Brazzell got the technical refinement down earlier in his career over at Tulane, and then took his name to a bigger stage so that he could be seen by the world, or more of the world, on that bigger stage at Tennessee. And when you put all that in together, when you put this 4-3 running 6'5" wide receiver with excellent body movement skills, you look at the Georgia tape, and not only with like the post touchdown that he had, with the deeper touchdowns, with the yards after catch touchdown that he had, there was one comeback route in particular that I watched early in the game before any of those touchdowns had been scored, and he snaps back on that comeback route and does a lot of the same stuff, maybe not with as much fluidity as Jordan Tyson, but does a lot of the same stuff that Jordan Tyson did with his route stems and where he chooses to break them off and how he uses his hands legally to separate and not have it be offensive pass interference. You see that all in that route for Chris Brazzell II, and that's why he's my number 2 wide receiver in this class. I like him better than Carnell Tate. I like him better than Mekhi Lemon. I like him better than Denzel Boston. I think Chris Brazzell is just beneath Jordan Tyson in terms of what he can be at the NFL level. And that means if Jordan Tyson is an injury-plagued wide receiver throughout his career, Chris Brazzell II is my wide receiver 1 in this class. So I am very high on what he can do. I think that he will break the mold of the Tennessee wide receivers and show that, okay, maybe some of these Tennessee wide receivers that have only gone to Tennessee might be completely broken, but the ones that come in from other colleges like Tulane that run shockingly a more sort of advanced route tree for their receivers and use a lot more plays that help wide receivers develop at the next level, those guys are going to be the ones that come into Tennessee and just kind of use Tennessee as their jumping off point into the NFL to get them some more notoriety and try to bolster their strength to eventually become a first-round pick. And maybe Chris Brazzell II is a first-round pick, but that's just where I have him. I have a lot of faith in Chris Brazzell II. All right. And then for wide receiver, a guy that I am not so high on is Casey Concepcion. I just don't see it with him. He's a fine route runner. He's got decent speed. His size is not great, though. And like I just see him being as a number 3 wide receiver in the NFL. I don't see him being this top of the line starter that I think a lot of people are projecting him into being, especially with some of the late fanfare that he is getting. He's outside of my top 10 for wide receivers right now. I just do not have big faith in Casey Concepcion. I don't like the way he tracks the ball, and he's supposed to be this deep vertical threat, but he can't track the ball and can't get in proper timing with his quarterback on some of those deep timing routes, and when he does, he can't see it necessarily, and when he does, he doesn't get his hands up to the right space and drops the football. So he has a lot of issues that I think need to be ironed out in order for him to reach that potential, and I don't know if he can iron out all of those issues. So I have him as a solid wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 for like your normal NFL team, and he's a guy that's being projected right now mid to late day 1 and early day 2. So Casey Concepcion, not as big of a fan as him. I like Mekhi Lemon. I don't think I'm quite as high on Mekhi Lemon as some other folks, and I like Denzel Boston. Same thing with him. I like both of them as starting wide receivers. I just do not have them as highly rated starting wide receivers as a lot of others would in this draft class. I do like Carnell Tate a lot. I think I'm about at consensus with Carnell Tate. On to tight ends. Kenyon Sadiq, again, with consensus, matching here. Is my number 1 tight end. The athleticism, the good blocking ability, and his big catch radius, the leaping catch that he made on a throw that Dante Moore had to put like way at the top of the table in order to get it over layers of defense, but also to get it into the right spot for Kenyon Sadiq. It was the only place he could put it, and Kenyon Sadiq rose up to the occasion and just snagged it out of the air. I think a lot of the times we can see that athleticism on the tape. I think we see the blocking ability. He's not like this, push everyone past you sort of blocker, but he is a competent blocker that can do most of the blocks that an NFL running scheme will use. So he's not just a move tight end, he's an inline tight end that can also be a move guy. You can make him a big slot as well, and I think he's going to do both of those things well. His route tree is not like super like refined, but neither are most tight ends. A lot of the tight ends can't afford to do what wide receivers do with their stems and with their quick cuts, just because they're bigger and don't have the same athleticism and aren't as light as those feet, light on their feet as those guys are. And I think Kenyon Sadiq falls into that same bucket. I wouldn't have him ranked up like Tyler Warren. I wouldn't have him ranked up near Colson Loveland or Brock Bowers. But when it comes to like a guy like Dalton Kincaid or like where we probably should have had our expectations for Kyle Pitts, I think he falls into that mode and is a little bit better of a blocker than Kyle Pitts as well. So I think he has the same athletic traits as Kyle Pitts. He has the same receiving ability that Kyle Pitts has shown, but he's also a better blocker and can be used up on the line of scrimmage more so than Kyle Pitts can effectively. For the most part, I feel like my tight ends are pretty by the board, except for one, and that is Oscar Delp, who has certainly been getting a lot of love recently, but I like him as the second best tight end in this draft. You can take Eli Stowers, you can take Max Clare, you can take Sam Roush. I will take Oscar Delp, a Georgia tight end first and foremost, and that's where Brock Bowers was from. That doesn't mean that Oscar Delp is Brock Bowers, but when I see Oscar Delp on tape, the first thing that stuck out to me was, oh, this guy is one heck of a blocker. Like, he is in pass protection able to stop edge rushers, or at least pass them off to the offensive tackle. He's good at picking up blitzes. He will move men out of the way, and he plays with this like tenacity that I think I always kind of fall for, this like competitive fire where he plays like his hair is on fire, and is just all over the place, pushing guys out of the way, has that high competitive drive. And I was like, okay, this guy's a really good blocker. And then you look at the seldom times that he is used as a receiver for whatever reason in that Georgia offense, and Delp is seemingly always open. And I'm like, okay, is this because they're just allowing an unathletic tight end to find a spot, even though it looks like he's running pretty fast? And then you look at his raw athletic score numbers, his 40, his height, his physical traits are there too. So you put all of those together, the blocking, the ability to get open, the athletic traits, the ability to catch the ball. I think Oscar Delp was criminally underutilized in the passing game at Georgia, and one of these teams on day 2 or day 3 is going to get one of the best tight ends for the next 10 years in the NFL when they pick Oscar Delp in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round, whenever it is that he ends up going. So really high on Oscar Delp. A guy that I'm lower on is Sam Roush. Like he's a guy that tested well. That I just did not see that on film from Stanford, and a lot of people say that he is a sleeper tight end. And for me, I just do not agree from what I was able to see. I don't think he is a accurate blocker on the move. I don't think he is this anything more than ordinary receiver. So I don't see the huge upside outside of the athletic upside, which I don't think really shows up on tape a whole lot when I look at the Stanford stuff. All right, a couple more left before we end today's show, and then we'll do defense in the show that will come out on Thursday. Offensive tackles. My top offensive tackle is Blake Miller from Clemson. This is very much against the grain. I, like most analysts, agree that there is no real top 10 offensive tackle in this draft. But the one that for me is closest to that would be Blake Miller. I think he is technically sound. I think that he on film just shows this great ability to stop whatever rusher he's going up against, mirroring that rusher. And he is at the top of the list for offensive tackle. For me, he can also get it done in the run game as well. I like Francis Mauigoa a lot. He's about where consensus would rank him on your typical draft board. So just to put it into perspective, I have Blake Miller just a bit above where you typically see Francis Mauigoa on most draft boards. A guy that I like, my draft day two or day three draft darling is Jennings Dunker, who is from Iowa and is being projected as a guard, but I think he can be an excellent right tackle in the NFL. And the guy that he reminds me of that I just keep seeing over and over again is Brian Bulaga, the Packers offensive lineman that played at a really high level, was never the best right tackle in the world, but was always very good, and was excellent with his hands. I think Jennings Dunker has a long wingspan and a large body to get around in the first place, and he also uses his hands well, where he uses that same sort of Brian Bulaga hug technique, letting the defender get their hands on you first so that you can then get your hands on the outside edges without it being called a hold, and kind of direct, as long as your arms stay not going way out to the wide and stay shoulder width with that player. You can keep your arms on the outside and they're never going to call holding on that, and you can now control where that player goes when you allow them to kind of get their hands on you first. And it's kind of it's a fine line that you have to walk, because a lot of times if they get their hands on you first, they can just push you back into the quarterback. With Jennings Dunker, he allows that to happen. He doesn't get pushed back into the quarterback, and he's able to redirect those blockers by using that hug block technique that Brett Coleman has done a number of videos on and explained more in depth on YouTube if you want to kind of get a good idea of what that hug technique, or you want to learn more about it and why it works, and probably with someone that can explain it with more eloquency than I did right there. And then a guy that I'm not super high on, and for offensive tackles, I'm just through 10 so far. But Spencer Fano, I have him among the first round tackles. I just don't see. I see the athleticism, but I don't see the technical ability. And I think we far too often rely on these athletic sort of offensive tackles to come into that technical refinement, and maybe that is the case with Spencer Fano, but I think more often than not, those offensive tackles do not grow into that refinement, because it is hard to learn at this stage of their NFL careers. So it's kind of the same boat as Monroe Freeling. I have both of those guys still rated as starting offensive tackles in the NFL, but I just think not as highly. But there's also the chance that both of those guys one of those guys do hit their athletic potential, because they refine their technique and then become very good offensive tackles. I'm just not going to bank on it to the point where I am projecting them higher than the guys that I think have shown it better on their college film so far. So offensive guard is next. And for me, it was very, very close. And I really do like Olivega-Ione. But for me, it's Emmanuel Pregnon, just a power, and I do kind of fall for these. Like Christian Mahogany was one of my favorites from a couple of years ago, and was begging the Vikings to draft him in the 5th and 6th round, and they went with like Michael Juergens and Walter Rouse instead, and then the Lions got Christian Mahogany. He hasn't like panned out, certainly, but I do kind of fall for these power guards that just move guys out of the way, and that's what Emmanuel Pregnon is. And I understand that you can get beat in other ways when you are so much in that zone and maybe overset and stuff like that, or over pursue, and then someone is able to just get by the gap pretty easily. But Emmanuel Pregnon just continued to win in the run game, and then also not really get beat too often in the pass game. So I like Emmanuel Pregnon just a hair about where I like Olivega-Ione. A guy that I am a bit higher on, and that is my guard number 3, would be Jalen Farmer from Kentucky. I think he does a lot of the same stuff as Emmanuel Pregnon, just without as much athletic upside. So Jalen Farmer from Kentucky is my day 2, day 3 darling. Brian Parker from the second from Duke I also like a lot. And then I am not really high as consensus is with both of these guys now. Like, people are saying, oh, these guys might find their way into the end of the first round, and I think that would be a massive mistake for whichever team does that, and that would be Chase Basantes and Keelan Rutledge, both with good size. Both have flashes on tape, but I did not see the consistency from both Basantes and Rutledge that I would like to see on a down-to-down basis, both against the pass and against the run. So I have both of those guys as borderline starting guards in the NFL, who would also be just very good swing pieces as the 6th guy along an offensive line. And last but not least, we will go to center, and my favorite center from this draft is Logan Jones. He is my number 1 guy, the Iowa Hawkeyes center, who's, like, when you watch him on tape, it is the hip fluidity that he plays with and the leverage that he gets combined with that hip fluidity. Even if he's undersized, he is able, because of those traits, he is able to not really lose at the line of scrimmage and to get good pushes in the run game and displace big nose tackles that have a significant size advantage against him, because his technique is so sound, and he just moves differently than the other centers in this class, and he's good enough as a pass protector. A lot of people have called him Tyler Linderbaum light, or Diet Linderbaum, because they both went to Iowa and they both play similar, and I would concur with that. I would say he is a Diet Tyler Linderbaum, and I think if you can get a Diet Tyler Linderbaum, you get a top 6, top 7 center in the NFL during his peak. And then a guy that I am higher on, my center 3, I have 3 guys that I have starting grades on at center, and then one other one who I will mention in just a moment, who I have as borderline starter grade. Matt Gulbin from Michigan State, I like a lot. Turning on his film for the first time, I was like, I was shocked at how low he was. I think he takes care of what is in front of him. He wins his one-on-ones. When he needs to pass off a player to, the outside tackle or the center to his right, he is able to do so. He is able to pick up stunts, and I think he thrives in pass protection and is pretty good against the run as well. So Matt Gulbin from Michigan State is a guard, or a center rather, that I really like in this draft. Probably a bit higher than consensus. And then, I'm not huge on Parker Brailsford. I don't really see it. I'm not huge on Jake Slaughter. I'm not huge on Connor Lew. And I think those are the 3 guys with Sam Hecht, who I am high on, but about with consensus. And then with Logan Jones, I think those are the guys that kind of have all been fighting for the top center spot. And I have Lew, Slaughter, and Brailsford at much lower tiers than I have for Logan Jones and Sam Hecht and even Matt Gulbin. Connor Lew is my borderline starter among those. Jake Slaughter, I think, will be a fine backup throughout his career. And then Parker Brailsford, I did not see it when I watched the Alabama film, and I am certainly not the end-all be-all when it comes to film analysis, so I could be completely off base there, but for me, it just was not working for Parker's Brailsford in the film that I watched. So that is the offense. And the offensive players at each position that I really like, that I don't like as much as others, and that I like more than others in this upcoming NFL draft. That draft will come your way, obviously, wherever it is that you want to watch it on, ESPN or NFL Network. I will not be doing anything live, but I will have a reaction to each day of the draft on day 1, day 2, and day 3 up for your podcasting, listening sort of pleasures on those days. And then we will have one more episode this week when we begin speaking about the defensive side and do the same sort of exercise. Also recap any news that has happened between now and then, and that will be out for you on Thursday. Thanks for tuning in to another Grey Duck NFL show. We will see you coming up on Thursday. Keep it tuned right here to the Grey Duck Sports Network.